Everything people believe falls into one of two major camps. You either believe that ultimately there's some harmony, there's some karma, there's some sort of poetic framework that binds everything we do, or you believe that there's none of that. Things just happen, people do things, ultimately we're all disconnected from each other, ultimately everybody's in a selfish pursuit. There's no real temporal harmony between what you do now and what happens later. There's no real reason for a connection between the generations, and ultimately everything is just beyond. It's different than a chaos sort of order, discussion. It's deeper than that. It's a belief that could kind of be encapsulated. It's a belief that I think can best be seen kind of at a pop culture level between like Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, where the reason Lord of the Rings works and it's enduring is because there is this harmony and this connection and this larger meaning between what a character does, even if it maybe seems small or insignificant, and the bigger impact it has, and the way that everybody sort of has a part in this bigger design, this bigger plan. Or you believe, like more like I was saying in that Game of Thrones distinction, where the reason that fell apart, beyond what we can talk about the production or whatever of the final season, not really here to rag on that. It's more the fact that the fundamental philosophy of that story is complete disconnection. Like nothing matters. None of the setups have payoff. None of anything that was being built towards ever comes to conclusion. None of the ends ever get tied up. Things just happen, characters do things, and nothing goes anywhere. And a lot of people have that worldview. A lot of people have that belief system. And I think that's something that gets ascribed whenever you see debates or discussions between Christians and atheists. That's usually what's the argument that's being levied against the latter, is simply if ultimately we're all disconnected. If there's nothing beyond what we can see that binds us together, then why not screw over the next generation? Why not be selfish? Why care about what happens at all to anyone else? I think, especially as I've gotten older, I definitely wholeheartedly believe in the first sort of worldview, that first sort of frame. Simply because I think when people assume the latter, they assume disconnection, they assume that there's no reciprocity to any of the things that they do. We're just looking at it on too short of a timeline. I think one thing that people are really bad at, because our lifespans are so short, and some of the patterns that we see, especially at large social levels, national levels, especially when you start looking at like geological timelines, these things happen across such broader timelines that it's really hard for us to understand and see the larger impact that's being had. So my question is just, which one do you fall in? And it's not as simple as saying just because you have a religious belief system that you ultimately believe in this harmony and sort of design behind everything that happens. Because a lot of what happens with religious assumptions and religious beliefs is that people think you have to follow their prescribed rule set for there to be any sort of consequence to what you do. They don't necessarily think that this pattern and this lyrical connection between us alive now, but also with what's going to happen in the future, what's happened in the past, they fail to see all these sort of invisible connections. They just think, well, you have to follow these rules or God will be mad, which is not exactly the same thing. It's not exactly the same thing at all. If I had to justify why I think there is some sort of larger connection, well, number one, if you're going to just pursue the latter, then you eventually will fall into some sort of just hedonic black hole, just some sort of never-ending pursuit of gain, of trying to like acquire more for your own self. And even if you wanted to try to operate selfishly. I think most people find eventually is that giving back and taking care of others can be just as rewarding as personal acquisition. So that to me is like a little clue that, maybe there is something to this, there is a connective tissue we don't see, because to engage with it as if it exists does give you something good in return. So I go, okay, it's like, eating healthy, staying hydrated. You may not notice it immediately, but if you take care of being hydrated, you're going to feel better in a lot of ways that you might not immediately understand, unless you're a nutritionist or a doctor or something, you spent time studying it and learning about it. So that is kind of, that's one of the first places I start. I go, okay, taking care of other people, giving something back, investing in the future. Those all give positive feedback. It reminds me of a quote. I can't remember where I first heard it, but civilization grows best when people plant trees, the shade of which they know they will never enjoy. And so I think how people are so focused on trying to obtain some sort of immortality. We're terrified of death, rightfully so. All living creatures, we fight as hard as we can to stay alive. We fight for our survival. Some people try to pursue some sort of pseudo immortality through their children, which isn't a terrible thing, because at least you're investing in the next generation. You're investing in what sort of comes after you. But I think there's also something just logically very dissatisfying about the disconnected Game of Thrones, right, worldview, where nothing matters, nothing means anything, nothing is connected to anything else. That's really, I think, what bothers us, is the fact that we know that connections exist. We know that things have to make sense. If you're watching a show, you're watching a movie, and a setup is not paid off later, it's deeply logically dissatisfying. So I go, okay, there's another clue that there is this sort of harmony. There is this sort of, reciprocity. And I think when you have any sort of practice that you partake in long enough, then you begin to see the benefits of what comes later. It's like anything, fitness, taking care of yourself, exercising, a lot of these things, they just take time. You have to do things the right way. And over time, you get the results. Over time, you get the payoff. And so when you kind of take a step back, I don't know if it's something that can be known directly. Maybe some people can perceive this through direct experience, but personally, I find an unlimited supply of these indirect clues that lead me to believe that there is some sort of harmonic structure underpinning everything else that, pick a different word, some sort of harmonic structure that everything else is based on, a scaffolding that ties how you treat this person. It may not seem like it matters. You let someone in, when you're driving, or you put your shopping cart back, all these little things, they might not seem like they matter. They might seem completely atomized and disconnected and meaningless. But I think that's just a limitation of our perception. I think we're just not able to see all the different ways that this thing connects to that thing. And the one big issue I have with currently the way this conversation is framed is oftentimes you get people on the Christian side of the conversation saying that either we're given a false dichotomy between traditional Christian belief and then atheism, here in the West at least. I'm just going to focus on that just for the sake of time. We're given the idea that you either believe and accept traditional religious values, or you're in that complete nihilism, complete disconnection, that Game of Thrones world of belief. And I think that false dichotomy is forcing so many people who maybe don't fit in to a traditional religious framework. It's forcing them to the other extreme. It's forcing people to say, okay, well, if the only options are I be a Christian or nothing matters and everything's disconnected, they're going to go, okay, well then I guess nothing matters and everything's disconnected and I'll just be selfish. And I think we're losing a capacity for nuance. We're losing a capacity to look at the universe and start with what we see and say, okay, we can see patterns, we can see harmony, we can uncover principles of human nature and human behavior that make sense for us to take care of one another in and of themselves. We don't have to have any sort of top-down rules. You know, a question I'll often ask in trying to have this conversation is murder wrong because God says it's wrong? Or did God tell us murder's wrong because there is something fundamental about the act of murder that destroys human connection and destroys relationships and destroys civilization, right? It's out of line. This is more almost like Taoism. It's more almost like understanding that there's a way of being and there's patterns that we can perceive. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, whether you're religious, whether you're not religious, what is it you believe?